Ever feel like you just need like a direct people repellent, like some kind of spray?
Right.
Well, today's deep dive is the next best thing, I think.
Yeah.
We're getting strategic today with dealing with toxic people, strategies for protecting your well-being.
Mm-hmm.
This source is really incredible.
Yeah.
It's packed with ways to not just spot these energy vampires, but to actually like get away from them, how to escape their clutches.
Yeah, and I think what's great about this source is it really emphasizes that it's not always like these super obvious villains, right?
Yes.
It's not always this like super dramatic outburst that you have to deal with. It's really like the subtle ways that this toxic behavior can really sneak up on you.
Yeah, and you don't realize it.
Right.
It's rarely like love at first red flag. It's more like, wait a minute.
Something's happening here, but I can't put my finger on it.
Exactly.
But what this source talks about is spotting those patterns over time.
Yes.
And it's not just about their actions, but how it's making you feel.
Exactly. And I think that's such a good point because, it's like that saying, if it walks like a duck.
Yeah.
Like they might not say, hey, I'm manipulating you.
Right.
But you just consistently, after interacting with this person, you feel drained. You feel doubtful.
You feel uneasy.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if I should trust this.
Right.
Okay, so let's get tactical here. What are some of the telltale signs that the source highlights? I'm ready to like upgrade my people filtering software here.
Yeah. Well, one that really stood out to me was this constant negativity. And it's not just complaining, right?
Yeah.
It's this strategic turning every single situation into a downer.
So it's like you share good news and they immediately have to point out all the potential downsides.
Yes.
The book calls it conversational sabotage. I love that.
Oh my gosh, I've been sabotaged.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Yeah,
It's like, why?
Yeah.
Why can't you just be happy for me?
Exactly.
The source also mentions manipulation.
Oh, yes.
And not like outright lying, which would be easier to spot,
Yeah.
but it's more like this twisting of the narrative to suit their needs.
Yes, and I think they really key in on this playing the victim.
Oh, yeah.
So, they might guilt trip you or even use like backhanded compliments to keep you off balance.
Oh.
This other tactic that the book mentions is selective memory, where they conveniently forget any agreements or promises when it benefits them.
Oh, my goodness. I know someone exactly like that. And then there's the classic narcissism, right?
Of course.
The world revolves around them.
Yes.
Everyone else is just an extra in their movie.
And the source makes a great point here that they often use this tactic called mirroring.
Mirroring.
Yes, where they will basically reflect your interests and opinions back to you.
Oh.
To draw you in initially.
Oh.
So you feel like you found a kindred spirit when in fact it's all a facade.
Wow, so they've studied the art of manipulation.
Exactly.
It's no wonder that being around these types of people can leave you feeling just emotionally drained and deflated.
Exactly. And I think what's so interesting is that it goes beyond just feeling drained, right?
Right.
Like the source dives into the actual physical toll that these toxic relationships can take on your health.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting, so give me the science here.
Oh.
What does the source say about how this negativity actually gets under our skin?
Well, it talks about studies that link prolonged exposure to toxic people to increased cortisol levels. And as I'm sure you know, that's the stress hormone.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
If you feel like you're constantly on edge, that can't be good for you.
Exactly. And chronically high cortisol, like that is linked to all sorts of nasty stuff.
Like what?
Sleep problems, like a weakened immune system.
Oh, really?
Increased risk of heart disease, even. It's like a slow-burning fire that's constantly wearing you down.
So it's not just in our heads, it's like literally impacting our bodies.
Exactly.
No wonder we feel physically and emotionally exhausted after dealing with these people.
Yeah, it's like they're draining your life force bit by bit. And, the source points out that this doesn't just impact you personally. It kind of like ripple effects on your other relationships, too.
Oh, right.
Even your work.
Yeah, remember that section about toxic spillover?
Yes.
I thought that was so insightful.
Yeah.
It's like their negativity just like contaminates everything around them.
Exactly. You might find yourself like withdrawing from supportive relationships or feeling less motivated at work because you're constantly carrying the weight of their drama.
Oh, and here I thought I was just being a bad friend because I needed space sometimes.
Right.
But knowing this, it's like, okay, it's not me. It's this like toxic cloud I'm trying to escape.
Exactly. And the longer you're exposed, the more likely you are to internalize that negativity, and start doubting yourself. and even adopting some of those toxic traits.
Oh, no.
Right.
So what do we do? How do we arm ourselves against this like emotional contagion?
Right.
Thankfully, this source doesn't leave us hanging. It's got a whole arsenal of strategies to fight back.
Yes.
This is where I get really fired up.
Yeah, this is great.
Okay, so let's dive in here.
Let's do it.
What are some concrete ways, based on the source, that we can start establishing those lines in the sand?
Well, it starts with identifying your non-negotiables,
Yeah.
right? Like, what are you absolutely not willing to tolerate?
Right, like those behaviors that just like make your skin crawl, or just like, oh my gosh, alarm bells are going off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And once you identify those, the source emphasizes the importance of actually communicating those boundaries
Okay.
clearly and directly.
Easier said than done, right?
Right.
Especially when you're dealing with somebody who's manipulative or used to getting their way.
Absolutely. And that's where I think the source offers some really helpful scripts for this.
Oh, okay.
Like, for instance, if someone's constantly dumping their problems on you, you could say something like, hey, I care about you, but I'm not the best person to talk to about this right now. Have you considered talking to a therapist?
Ooh, I love that.
Right.
It's direct. It shows empathy, but it also sets a clear boundary. Like, this is not okay.
Yes.
So it's not about being mean.
Right.
It's about protecting your own energy and mental space.
Precisely. And if they try to push back or guilt you, the source suggests a technique called the broken record.
A broken record.
Yes.
I like it.
Where you basically calmly repeat your boundary, like a
Yeah.
broken record, without engaging in their drama.
I like it. A broken record technique.
Yes.
It's like a superpower against emotional vampires.
Exactly.
Let's be honest. Sometimes setting boundaries alone isn't enough.
Right.
What about those situations where you can't fully escape the toxic person? Like, let's say it's a coworker or a family member.
Yeah. That's where the source's advice on limiting exposure comes into play.
Good. Tell me more about that limiting exposure. How do we do that without becoming a hermit?
Well, it's about being strategic, right? It's not about disappearing entirely.
Okay.
The source suggests things like keeping your interactions brief and focused on like neutral topics.
Okay, so like if you're stuck in the break room with a negative Nancy,
Yeah.
you don't have to engage in like a 20-minute vent session.
Exactly.
Just like, hey, how's it going? And then make a strategic escape to go grab another cup of coffee.
Exactly. And if they're trying to bait you into some kind of drama spiral,
Right.
the source gives this great line, I'd love to chat more, but I've got to run. You know, short, sweet, and you're out of there.
Love it. It's like dodging an emotional bullet, right?
Exactly.
But the source also talks about emotional detachment as a way to protect yourself.
Yes. And this one can be a little tricky
Yeah.
because it sounds kind of cold,
Right.
but really what it's about is shifting your perspective.
Oh.
Instead of getting sucked into their emotional whirlwind,
Yeah.
you're kind of observing it from a distance.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's like putting up an invisible shield so their words and actions might still reach you, but they don't pierce your armor.
Exactly.
I like that.
And the source even suggests, like, picturing yourself surrounded by this protective bubble.
Okay.
I know it sounds a little out there, but visualization can be really powerful.
Whatever works.
Right.
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 But what about when even those strategies aren't enough?
Right.
Sometimes, like, the only option is to create some serious distance.
Right. And the source is very clear on this. Walking away from a toxic relationship, even if it's family or a longtime friend, is not selfish.
It's self-preservation.
Exactly.
And that's such a crucial point. It's like the source is giving you permission to choose you,
Yes.
your well-being, your mental health, your happiness. It's not about being mean. It's about recognizing that sometimes you need to step away from the fire to avoid getting burned.
Absolutely. And the source reminds us that, this is a process. It's not always a clean break.
Right.
It might involve gradually distancing yourself, setting those firm boundaries, and eventually reaching a point where you minimize or even eliminate contact.
Yeah, it takes strength and courage to walk away. But as the source so brilliantly points out, sometimes the bravest and kindest thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from a relationship that's no longer serving you.
Exactly. And remember, you don't have to do this alone.
Right?
Lean on your support system. Talk to a therapist if you need to.
Yes.
There's no shame in seeking help and support during this process.
So there you have it.
Yes.
We explored the treacherous terrain of toxic people, learned to spot those warning signs, and equipped ourselves with practical strategies to protect our energy and well-being.
And I love that we went from feeling powerless to empowered.
Yeah.
Understanding that we actually have choices.
Yes.
We can set those boundaries, and ultimately we have the right to choose who we allow into our lives.
This deep dive has been eye-opening.
It really has.
Remember, knowledge is power. And now you've got the tools to navigate those tricky interpersonal waters and cultivate healthier, more fulfilling relationships.